Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Guys Who Stared. Stats Cade Kennedy with you alongside Tyler Riggs. It is weird to think it's here, but we're already midway through the college football season, week number 7. And Tyler, what a massive 2 games we have coming into Saturday night. It's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, we got Oklahoma taking on Texas this week, always a massive rivalry. Quite a few good games to keep an eye on. Should be an absolute fun week of football. But then again, what week isn't, Tyler?
Yeah, after what we saw last week, I don't think you could just take your eyes off any slate or any game at this point.
I don't think you can. But before we get into the video, as always, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and hit that notification bell to be notified when new videos come out. And before we really get into this, I do want to kind of word to the wise here. This is being recorded on Monday. This should come out, if I remember, if I wake up on time, this should come out Wednesday morning or maybe late Tuesday night even. But keep in mind, if any breaking news or something like happens, this was recorded on Monday night at 7:45 here, looking at my clock. So please don't, if you're in the comments saying, well, why didn't you talk about this? That's probably why. It may not have happened yet. But getting into the first game, and Tyler, it is the massive one. Game day going to be in Eugene, Ohio State taking on Oregon. You don't see top 3 matchups happen all that often, so anytime you get to see it, it's always a special deal. And right now, Ohio State 3-point favorites going into Autzen.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel the same about that. Not that necessarily Oregon's warranted, to be the favorite in this game, but I feel it's a lot more. 3 is a coin toss, but when you're talking about the road team being favored by 3, Vegas sides a little bit more with the Buckeyes for sure in that sense. I think this is a coin flip, Cade. I mean, both these teams have kind of shown, I wouldn't call it weak points, but maybe points of an urgency, not being as urgent as they need to be. And now it's time to put up or shut up, right? So who's going to emerge from that? Who's going to come out and actually want to say, hey, this is our chance to take control of the Big Ten?
Absolutely. And that's the weird thing about this game is I agree these are 2 of the best teams in college football, but we kind of talked about it a little bit on our recap video that this is one of those years where it doesn't really feel like it, though. This is a big game, but at the same time, like you mentioned, the glaring weaknesses. We've seen Ohio State, the slow starts. It happened against Michigan State. It happened against Iowa. You cannot get off to a slow start on the road, especially at a dangerous environment like Oregon has against the type of team that Oregon has that can absolutely pounce on you for doing that. But at the same time, Oregon's had some sluggish starts of their own, and they've had some quarters where they just seemingly take their foot off the gas. It happened against Michigan State where you would see Oregon move down the field and Dylan Gabriel would throw an interception in the end zone, or he'd throw an interception at the 2-yard line. Can Dylan Gabriel rise up to the occasion like we know he can do? We've seen him all do it before. It's just a matter of will it happen, and it's going to be a tough test for him because Ohio State's defense, you want to talk about top 5 in the nation in efficiency. This is a Buckeye defense that even though the offense has struggled, defensively, Ohio State as sound as they always are.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, right? Can Oregon survive that? This is for both teams for the most part their best test so far this season. So can Oregon come out, execute the way that we've seen them at times do so far this season? Ohio State's going to bring the nastiness. I'm not worried about that. It's really all on the offenses. How do they respond?
Yeah, and that's, I think, the key matchup of this. Is Ohio State, they'll be fine defensively, but can Will Howard perform when the moment's needed? We obviously know about the running backs. Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, I think they'll be fine. They'll have their big plays. The receiving will happen. Someone like a Jeremiah Smith, a Mega Ibuka, they've got the talent. It's just, can Will Howard get the ball to them successfully before either the D-line breaks through and Will Howard's sitting on the turf, or some other travesty happens? Because this is the one worry I had about Ohio State the entire season. And you can go back to the preseason prediction video if you want to see me talk about it then. Where will Will Howard be when the spotlight is on him? When everyone is waiting for him to have the big moment, is he going to show up? Because we saw it happen at Kansas State time and time again. He might be there for a quarter or 2 of a big game, but he may not be there the entire game, and we'd see Kansas State fall behind and sometimes lose because of it. If he can play as well as we know he can, especially with all the talent he has around him, I think Ohio State should win this game. I think on paper they are the better team than Oregon. But with all those factors going against them, that's why we've got a really what feels like a 50-50 ball game here.
Yeah, and to make the point about the other quarterback in this one, Dylan Gabriel, you mentioned how, Will Howard would come out at Kansas State, maybe plays good for a quarter, maybe two in some of those big matchups, but wouldn't be able to do it all 4 quarters. We've seen Dylan Gabriel respond to those moments. You think back to the Red River game last year against Texas. That drive he led to win that thing was fantastic. So he's battle tested in those moments. We've seen that from him. So it is really on the shoulders of Will Howard, I think, overall for Ohio State this year, and not only this game, but going forward, how far can he carry them? Because we know the rest of the pieces are good, but it all comes down to him because we know the quarterback is the most important position of football.
I agree, and this is one of those that, when a push comes to shove, though, I've gone back and forth in my head on this all day, kind of thinking about this game. I think that, if you would have talked to me maybe an hour ago, I would have told you Oregon would have won the game. If you talked to me 2 hours ago, I would have said Ohio State's going to win. It's been one of those just kind of back and forth looking at this one all day, and I think, Tyler, it's prediction time finally. And I think Ohio State finds a way to win. I didn't think they would at the beginning of the year, but with how Oregon's had their moments just of, excellent play one quarter and average play the next, I think if Ohio State gets out to that slow start, they're doomed, but I think Oregon's going to be right there with them in that first quarter. They both get off to kind of slow starts, trying to feel each other out, and to me, that's advantage Buckeyes, and I think Ohio State goes on the road. A tough win, but a massive win nonetheless.
I'm going to go the opposite way. I feel, Oregon's kind of being disrespected a touch here. The Austin Zoo is not an environment you just walk into and, go get wins all the time at. I think the unsung hero of this game is not going to be Dylan Gabriel. It's not going to be Tez Johnson. Give me Jordan James, the running back, to make some big-time plays. He's having a great start to the season, and, you put so much focus on the attack of Oregon, but I think he gets a little lost in the shuffle sometimes, and he'll prove you can't do that to him in this one.
Yeah, and it'll be fun to see because James, like you mentioned, I think he really had his big breakout game last Friday against Michigan State. I think that was really the game that kind of, okay, this is who he is. If he can stay consistent, like you mentioned, Tez Johnson, if he can have a big game, the keys to victory are there for Oregon. I just think Ohio State's defense a bit too powerful at times for them. I like to see, maybe Denzel Burke locks someone up or something like that. I just think Ohio State a little bit better than Oregon in this one. But it will be a fun game nonetheless, and that takes us to another one I think we might have the same disagreement on, Tyler. This is Ole Miss and LSU, the Saturday night game on ABC. Ole Miss number 9 in the country, LSU number 13 in the land, and Ole Miss 3-point favorites in Death Valley, kind of a similar situation of the road team being the higher-ranked opponent, coming into this one still favored at a very, you want to talk about ridiculous place to have to go play at. LSU, it's called Death Valley for a reason, folks. I mean, it is just a nightmare to try to deal with. And you look at this one, Tyler, and at least the way it is for me, Ole Miss, a fantastic offensive team. I mean, we know that. We can list off all the guys. Jackson Dart, great quarterback. We can talk about Henry Parrish Jr., running back. We can talk about Trey Harris and Antoine Wells Jr., wide receiver. But can LSU do something offensively? I think is going to be the main key of this game. We know LSU's had struggles defensively. They are last in the SEC in passing yards given up per game. They have the worst secondary by far of anyone on the SEC, at least statistically speaking, 5 games through the year for LSU. They're going to give up a lot of points. It's just, can LSU get some playmaker going? Garrett Nussmeier's going to have to make some throws. Can LSU get someone going? I'd like to see maybe someone like a Caden Durham, especially being a running back. Ole Miss only allows 63 rushing yards a game. If you can break through that just a little bit, open up that passing game, I think LSU has a shot to get the job done here.
And weirdly enough, Cade, I'm kind of agreeing with you, just because in a game like this, when, and we've seen it under Brian Kelly with this group, for whatever reason, they've got their issues. They're not, um, tight all around. Let's say you mentioned some of those weaknesses. It seems like in these matchups, they find a way to stick around and just hang around and pull it out in the end, for better or for worse, for the rest of the season. And it's not like Ole Miss has been perfect. They've shown some weaknesses, and you highlighted those properly. So give me the home team again. I like the home underdogs this weekend. I think they're being slighted just a touch. Should be a heck of a fun game, but I think in a craziness atmosphere like this, LSU finds a way to get it done.
And see, I agree with you. I think this is a big statement for Brian Kelly, I think, as well. I mean, you lose the USC game earlier in the year. You have got to have a moment to kind of get the fan base on board with you. You kind of need to have that connection once again that, hey, I'm the guy for the job. I can win these type of games. And it's interesting to me that it kind of feels that same way, not as much for Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin. We've seen the improvements he's made at Ole Miss. But in a way, it kind of feels like it for both coaches that you need a win to show, okay, we are legitimate this year. I am not a fraud. I am not a bad coach. I know what I'm doing. Please do not ever think about firing me.
I think that's a desperate way to describe it, but I think it's true. It's both of these coaches, people will tell you, oh, hey, like if you're an Ole Miss or an LSU fan, for the most part, most weeks, they feel, all right, this guy knows what he's doing. And then you have those games where they fall when they're not supposed to. There's those weaknesses appear, and you go, wait a minute, is this truly our guy? And I don't even know if a win for either of these guys in this game could really help them beat those allegations. I think that's just the stigma that comes with a Lane Kiffin and a Brian Kelly. That's just how they are. You want to trust them, but I don't know if you could ever fully trust them.
And that's where it is. To me, it's a battle of who do you trust more? Do you trust Lane Kiffin more or do you trust Brian Kelly more? And I know it's at LSU. I know it's Saturday night in Death Valley. I know LSU had a bye week before this game. I picked Ole Miss to lose last week. I'm not making that mistake again. Give me the Rebels to go on the road and get the job done. I don't think LSU's going to have the offense to fully pull this one off. I think they give up too many points in too early of a time in Ole Miss. They don't take their foot off the gas, but they can slowly start to pull away in that second half and get the job done. So, Tyler, we're 0 for 2 here. We're the double disagreement going on here.
Yeah, you like the road favorites. I like the home underdogs. So we'll see what prevails on that.
Well, unfortunately, the next game we're talking about here is going to ruin that home versus road trajectory because now we've got Texas and Oklahoma. There is no home team in this game. This is in my very biased opinion as an Oklahoma fan, this is, top 2 rivalry in college football, maybe number 1, depending on where you are in America. Texas, a 14-point favorite, the number 1 team in the country. It's been a long time since that has happened. I don't know if you saw the stat earlier today, Tyler, but for the first time since 1984, Texas is the number 1 team in the country coming into the Red River rivalry. The last time that happened was a 15-15 tie in a game where OU famously intercepted a pass in the end zone to seal the game, only for it to be ruled incomplete somehow after a guy caught it and took 3 steps and fell down, and Texas was able to kick a field goal to get the tie. But Oklahoma, this is the 5th time ever the Sooners are going to be playing number 1 Texas in Dallas. OU is 0-3-1, won the one tie in 84 so far when that's happened. Oklahoma has the chance to make history, but it would be a very uphill battle considering Oklahoma's offensive woes, the injuries that Oklahoma's had, and not to mention Texas is probably the best team in the country right now. They are the only team that I think every single week I look at them and go, yeah, they did what they were supposed to. They did more than they were supposed to. They won the game, they blew out their opponent, and they moved on just fine.
Not so fast, my friend. You make that last point of did what they were supposed to, maybe more. Against Colorado State, sure. Against UTSA, sure. Against Ole Miss, sure. Michigan, I don't know. Michigan's not a great team. You go win that one, you control the game. So, okay, we'll give you that one. We'll give you that one. But
I think there you go. We got you back.
Okay. Anyways, they kind of cruised last week against Mississippi State, a team that has been drastically not good. I mean, we're talking about a team that got blown out by Toledo 41-17 and had Florida fans feeling better about their season. Um, that being said, yes, Arch was starting. You expect Quinn Ewers to be back, in this game. So I won't say Texas is fraudulent, but Cade, I don't think they've been truly tested. You could make the argument for the Michigan game. That was a good early test, but as we found out, Michigan's not really a complete team. Um, and Texas's defense really executed that one. There's no question. But this is the best defense that they're going to play. So how does that Texas offense respond? Problem for OU, of course, is you're just not healthy.
Yeah,
We
I would
haven't seen
say,
the injury report yet for this week, and that will be a big factor in deciding, okay, does Oklahoma have a legitimate chance? You got to get a couple receivers back. There's got to be Nick Anderson, Deion Burks getting healthy.
yeah,
If not, then I don't know if I see the path for the Sooners in this one.
yeah. Literally, the notes I have here, my piece of paper notes. I went old school this week and actually got a piece of paper with notes on it. The thing
Hey,
I wrote down for this game is wide receivers for both teams. For Texas, is it going to be Isaiah Bond, Ryan Wingo, Matthew Golden? Who is going to be the guy that steps up in this game? In Red River lore, so to speak, someone is always a hero in this game. Someone comes out of nowhere to establish themselves in the next chapter of this rivalry. Who is that guy going to be for Texas this year? And usually it's a receiver or a running back. Texas is kind of struggling with the run game. Some of that's injuries, some of that's other stuff. That's the only thing that I think really matches up well for Oklahoma. Texas's running game, which is only good but not great, against Oklahoma's run D, which we know is, I think, the strength of Oklahoma's defense. And then for Oklahoma, wide receiver core. Is there a wide receiver core left? I don't really think there is, Tyler. We're just putting some guys together and hope we can wrap them up and bubble wrap the second the game ends, and that's where we go from there. But I think Oklahoma, if they can get a Deion Burks back, if they can get maybe even a Taylor Tatum back, he's a guy that, he is a running back, but he's got some great hands as well, has the ability to make some catches. Maybe Bauer Sharp, who's a tight end that can't block, so he might as well be a receiver anyway. You put him out there, see what he can do. Oklahoma has the ability to win this game, but they are going to have to make this an ugly, ugly slugfest, I think, if they get the job done.
yeah, I think if Texas gets 28, it's probably meaning a Longhorn win. This has got to be to your point, this has got to be a 17-13 type game for OU to legitimately have the chance, right? They've got to really be able to slow down Texas, it feels like.
Yeah, and I mean, I've told you my dream scenario about this earlier in the year, earlier in the week even. My dream scenario, and this will cause this is a true sicko scenario, so this is sicko committee approved. Texas has a 13-0 advantage with 8 minutes left in the game. Oklahoma blocks a punt and scores off of it. Texas goes 3 and out, and Oklahoma goes on like a game-winning 6-minute drive out of nowhere to win it, 14-13. That is my true scenario where Oklahoma fans have to deal with what we knew, but hey, we're still covering. Anything could happen. You get one thing to go your way, and Oklahoma finds a way to win. Will that happen? No. If that does, I am retiring from life forever. I will be glad knowing I predicted this. But I don't think it's going to happen. I just do not see it in the cards for Oklahoma this year. 14 is a little bit high on the spread. I get it, considering everything going on Oklahoma's side. I think OU can cover that. It's just, I don't think they can beat Texas this year. I think it's a combination of Texas being very talented and Oklahoma having talent that just really hasn't had the ability to develop yet because of the injury situation, really everywhere on the offensive side of the ball. Unless Michael Hawkins can provide a classic OU Texas, the better team does not win type of miracle that we've seen happen a lot in the Cotton Bowl. It would not be surprising. Crazier things have happened. You look at 2013, you look at 2015, you look at 1996 for the Oklahoma side. It can happen. It's just very unlikely.
Yeah, it's going to have to be everything breaking right for Oklahoma. There's no question.
Yeah, it'll be a hopefully not rough game for Oklahoma fans, at least for my sake, because I'm going to be there. And I'm already, going to get sunburned. So that's already the one thing going against me. I burn very easily. So we'll see, Can I get some enjoyment out of this game, or am I going to get all my excitement out of the way with the fair going on before the game and all that stuff? We will have to see. But Texas, I think, gets the job done pretty easily against Oklahoma. But we've got one more big game to talk about, Tyler. And that is a game that, if you looked about 2 weeks ago, you would have been pretty excited for this game. Penn State, USC, CBS game, middle of the day. Penn State's finally going to get tested, going out to LA, the Coliseum. What a great new Big Ten game to show off. And here we are a few weeks later, and USC's unranked. They just lost to Minnesota. They lost to a Michigan team that can't throw the ball. I mean that legitimately. Michigan only had 32 passing yards against USC. And in comes Penn State, who's a 5.5-point favorite. Penn State, I think the most solid team in America right now. I know I said this on the recap. I'll say it again here. They don't do anything that'll wow you, but they don't do anything that makes you really question them. There's no real main weakness for them. I think Penn State, if they can get that run game going, we know the defense will be there for the Nittany Lions, but it's how does the run game work?
It is, and I think we talked about this in the season preview as well, that a lot was riding on Drew Aller. Not that he was going to have to be a Heisman candidate, right? But he's going to have to at least take care of business and show that he can be a competent, solid, consistent quarterback. And you can make the case that so far he's done that. He's made a big leap in his completion percentage to this point in the season, sitting at 70%. We know he can take care of the ball. We saw it last year despite the high number of incompletions. And he's on pace to do that again. So with him playing the way he is, plus that stacked run game, the defense, I agree they're probably the most all-around consistent team, it feels like, right now, especially in that top five, outside of Texas, maybe. But I just, with so many problems going on for USC, they're just not there right now. I think Penn State walks in here and they cover this. They get a touchdown or more in terms of this win.
Yeah, I would say the big numbers to keep an eye on here are 7.7 and 5. That is the yards per carry of Nick Singleton, 7.7, and Katron Allen with 5 for Penn State. USC gave up almost over 5 to Minnesota. You're playing a lot different of a team than Minnesota. You're playing a Penn State team that, with Kolodnicki, the offensive coordinator, if he can ram the ball down your throat, he's going to do it. He's going to find a way to do it. And Penn State, I think this could be a blowout. I really do. I'm not saying it will be, but I could see this scenario where this gets out of hand. Penn State's defense comes out swarming. The run game's going well. Aller does enough, kind of becomes more of just a game manager scenario for him. And Penn State rolls to victory. I don't think it'll turn into a blowout. USC's got enough of an offense to keep this interesting for a little bit. But Penn State, 5.5, I think they're easily covering that.
Yeah, it just feels like you mentioned it. It's not necessarily a blowout, but it feels like a game where if Penn State gets up, 14 early, midway through the first quarter or late first quarter, that will probably be enough for them to be able to control the game. Not necessarily just go put it to USC, but, a game where they win, 27-10, something of that nature. Double digits, controlled it. Doesn't look horrible on the scoreboard, but in the sense that, Penn State just still absolutely dominated.
Yeah, I think so. But folks, that wraps up the main games of the week to keep an eye on. And now it is time for good old upset alert. And upset alert to me is a 3-tier system. Tyler, I know I've talked about it before. There is the upset warning, which I describe as, 50% chance of an upset or greater, or an upset is in progress currently in the second half of a game. Because, we can have an upset in the first half. The Citadel had a 10-10 game with Alabama at halftime. That doesn't really mean anything until we get to the third quarter. We have an upset watch, which in my opinion is defined as a 25 to 49% chance of an upset happening. The conditions are there for it. We don't know if it will happen. And then there's an advisory. That's 24% and lower. That is, conditions are probable or there's a probability that the conditions for an upset may or may not happen. So let's get that terminology out of the way. I like to mix up my meteorology and my football sometimes. Living in Oklahoma, you kind of have to. But the first game on upset watch for me, at least, is Iowa State going to West Virginia, the primetime game on Fox. They call this one the Riot Bowl. These are two fan bases that they know how to throw a party. They've seen a lot of upsets in their time. They know how to celebrate the right way. And Iowa State, number 11 team in the country, coming in as a 3-point favorite. And Morgantown at night, it's not a fun place to play, Tyler.
Yeah, but I don't know. There feels like there's a little something different about this Iowa State team. They've just been quietly taking care of business. Yes, you had the wildness that was the Iowa game, but they pulled it out, and since then have been very consistent, albeit against not great competition. Still, though, they've done what's been asked of them. And West Virginia, I think, for me, has just been too inconsistent. Not to say they can't make this a game and have a chance, but it feels like Iowa State's just been, plodding along. They've got done in multiple ways. You've got three different runners with over 200 yards for them. Beck kind of not ideal as a quarterback, but he's been solid enough. So it's kind of like a Penn State light, if you will. Maybe not as sharp, but there's no huge weakness for this team. And I think the way the Big 12 is right now, that might be good enough to at least get you through some of these unranked road games, if you will.
Then I think so. We'll discuss picks here in a moment, but I just kind of want to set the stage for why I think these games have that potential with them. Iowa State, like you mentioned, they have been a kind of, like you said, Penn State light. They're a team that they go about their business, they get the job done, and then they have a good Saturday evening. You very rarely do many fan bases get to have that, where it's just, okay, come in, take care of business, we're having a good time. We're 5-0. We are looking good, which in the Big 12 is very hard to do. It is very hard to look good back-to-back weeks with how chaotic the Big 12 can be. And that brings me to the next game on Upset Watch. That's Utah at Arizona State. This is the Friday night game, 9:30 Central. It'll be, I believe, 7:30 the way they do things Pacific time there in Tempe. Utah started out as a 3-point favorite. They've jumped up to 6.5 now. And for me, the upset watch really is contingent on, is Cam Rising going to play for Utah? This is the end-all be-all question for the third week in a row now for the Utes, or third game in a row now, I should say. Because if it's not, if we're going Wilson again, then it's going to come down to Micah Bernard. And how well can Utah run the ball? Because if they get stuffed, if Arizona State starts swarming there like we were able to see Arizona do, Arizona State's a good enough team that they'll eventually figure something out on how to beat a stingy Utah defense. And of course, we got to talk about the guy that we both love, college football legend himself, just one of those guys, kind of like Diego Pavia in my mind, that he's just there. And the moment you forget he exists, he's going to bust out and have a big game. That is the one, the only Cam Skattebo.
Oh, man, can't talk enough about Cam Skattebo. Come on now. One of the best players in college football that's not going pro. Let's put it that way, right? Because he's not a guy you look at and say, that's an NFL talent, but, man, he's a heck of a football player no matter what. And, yeah, this game really does come down to that run game regardless, I think, of if it's Rising or Wilson, because if Rising is playing, right, at all, he's going to be a little rusty. I mean, you don't just sit out that long and not have a little rust to work with. So how can you formulate that if you're Utah? You got to do your typical thing, turtle shell, control this game, try to undercut that early momentum, right? Because Arizona State might come out trying to fire. They've had some high points in terms of being able to really rally on opponents, and their games have been very touch and go all season. So I expect none the less here, Cade. But can Utah control? Definitely the big question in my mind. Because if they do that, it could be like a classic Utah win where, okay, it's a little ugly, it's a little back and forth, but in the end, you never felt like Utah, might have actually let slip. That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, it'll be curious to see, how does Utah play this? If it's the traditional grounded pound, that can only work for so long. I think we saw that against Arizona. That can only be good enough until that dam breaks. And I know we've had that conversation before. Utah's defense is going to have a bad night where they give up a 28. Boy, I wish every team could say that. A bad night on defense is 28. That's just where Utah is. Maybe they'll give up a 31 or a 35 or something like that. But how do they respond when that moment happens? I don't know if it'll happen this week. That's why it's only an upset watch. I cannot guarantee a warning, but Utah might just be in trouble late night in Tempe. But we got one more game to talk about, and this is not an upset watch. This is an upset advisory, and more really just of a game of interest for me. Alabama is a 21-point favorite against South Carolina. Alabama is coming off the most embarrassing loss they have ever had, at least in my lifetime, losing to Vanderbilt. If South Carolina comes out firing, keep in mind, this is an 11 a.m. game. This is the early game on ABC. If South Carolina is able to take advantage a little bit, we know what Coach Beamer's able to do there. If he looks at the tape and says, okay, let's try to play the similar style like Vanderbilt did. We may not be able to hold on to the ball for 42 minutes, but let's try to see what we can come up with. So you see if you can kind of game plan on the fly here. And if South Carolina finds a way to make this a ball game for 3 quarters, Tyler, what discussion do we start having about Alabama? And this could all not happen. Alabama might blow them out of the water, but this feels like a game that has turned into a statement game for Alabama. 2 weeks ago was their big statement game over Georgia. Now they've got to do it again to show this is not going to be, a 2-game hangover or something like that. Alabama needs to put their foot down, and they need to put their foot down immediately.
Cade, there was a lot made in the offseason when Kalen DeBoer came in about the transition of cultures. He's a different guy than Nick Saban, right? He gets most out of his guys in a different manner. Saban, the more iron-fisted, old-school Belichickian type guy. DeBoer a little bit more free-flowing and the modern, if you will. Here's the test. Can Alabama buckle down and be serious, as you're talking about, in a game where if you don't establish that tone early, you're going to let your opponent feel like, okay, they're still reeling. They're still a team that's shaking a little bit after that loss. So do we see an Alabama of old where they just come out and handle business? I think it's a proper advisory on this one. One, you just at least want to keep your eye on in the first half. How does Alabama come out? I think that's definitely the big point of this one. If they come out strong, it should theoretically carry them. But you got to see it first. You got to see it.
Absolutely. And that's where I'm at. Alabama, it's weird to say this. It really is. It doesn't sound like it makes sense until you think about it in this context. Exactly what you just said. I have to see what Alabama does this week against South Carolina. That's not a sentence we thought we'd be saying 2-3 weeks ago. We thought that to be, okay, it's another ho-hum game for Alabama. They're on their way to their big matchup with Tennessee down the road. And keep in mind, that's next week in Knoxville. You cannot get caught looking ahead to that big rivalry either. You've got to be able to play the opponent in front of you, and I think everyone knows that. I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here. But if South Carolina...
Well, Alabama preached it going into the Vanderbilt game, and it didn't matter.
Yeah, I know.
That's
exactly.
the serious part.
Yeah, it's going to be... This might be... this is either going to be beat down of the week territory, or this is going to be one of those weird head-scratching moments in college football history where, all right, Kalen DeBoer, you've got to prove to everyone that you're never going to be the guy, but you've got to be a good enough guy who replaces the guy. This is that moment for him.
Yeah, this is for him. Saban had the cachet to say when you had a loss like that, which was very rare under Nick Saban, obviously. But if they had one, you had enough belief that Saban had built up their reputation to go, well, that was a flash in the pan. They'll easily turn around and get it done next week. And usually they would. I mean, it was, rare you would catch them slipping, if you will, on back-to-back weeks. So for DeBoer, he doesn't have that trust. Yeah, he had great success at Washington, but Alabama, you don't have that trust. So you've got a chance here to at least establish a little bit of it, maybe.
Yeah, you say, and even listening to some of the Alabama fans, even on Feinbaum today. Granted, it is Paul Feinbaum's show. Legend himself goes on a 6-minute rant, and so that's kind of that welcome to big boy blue blood football. You can't drop a game like this and expect to get away with it. People are going to bring their pitchforks out. People are going to bring their pitchforks out even if Bama found a way to win this game. People are going to be desperate to see what Alabama does this week. I think they'll take care of business. I think they'll get the job done here. This isn't a game we're going to predict later on, so I think we can make our call on this one. I think Alabama, they win. I don't know if they're going to cover 21, but they're going to get the job done. If they lose to South Carolina, we absolutely have a major developing story on our hands then. That will bring us into finally the last part of the show, the other game. I don't. We got to find a better name for this. Other games sounds too mean-spirited. You know, these are still good teams we're going to be talking about here. Best of the rest kind of also feels that way to me. But games of interest. Let's call it games of interest. And we got to go right back to the well, that Utah-Arizona State game, because we talked about it. If you're watching the video, we talked about this literally moments ago. Arizona State has the ability to beat Utah here. It's just, is Cam Rising going to be healthy? If Cam Rising plays, Utah wins. I don't know if he's going to, though. And if he doesn't, give me the Sun Devils in the upset. By the power of Cam Scatterbo, Arizona State will get the job done.
Can we just put the whole Big 12 on games of interest this week, because there's not a spread that's bigger than a touchdown? A lot of key matchups as well when it comes to sorting out who's legit top contenders in the conference, right? You got Iowa State, West Virginia, both 2-0 in the conference. Colorado's 2-0 in the conference, hosting Kansas State. Cincinnati, UCF aren't quite done, although there's a lot going down. Apparently it's UCF, but they're still 1-1 each in conference. Utah, Arizona State, as you mentioned, is an interesting one. BYU hosting Arizona. Arizona trying to get back into the picture now after a loss. So, I mean, just put the whole conference on, hey, games of interest. We might find out a little bit more about who's legit in the Big 12 this week.
I think we are. Utah, they have the ability. Like I said, Micah Bernard, fantastic running back. He's going to have to be the difference maker for them offensively. You know what Utah's bringing to the table on the defensive side. They can make this a low-scoring game. It more than likely will be a low-scoring game. Tempe's one of those weird environments when you get late at night. This is just that Pac-12 after dark energy has been shifted into Big 12 after dark energy. I think it carries over. Arizona State, we've had some weird things happen on Friday night too. I like the Sun Devils for that reason alone. And then you also throw Cam Scatterbo in the mix. All-time college football guy. Not going to be an NFL guy, but he's just a football player. He gets things done on the field. But we've got a little bit more to talk about before we jump into, like you mentioned, really just delving into the entire Big 12 this week. Another game to keep an eye on, Florida and Tennessee, because Florida and Tennessee is one of those weird games where some years, no matter how good Tennessee is, they find a way to lose to Florida. And, I mean, you've seen it before. You'll see it again at some point. Florida finds ways to beat Tennessee, and sometimes not just the most head-scratching ways possible, I think is the best way to really say it. Tennessee's a 15.5-point favorite. They're at home. They're coming off an embarrassing loss by their perspective to Arkansas. Tennessee, it's kind of similar with Alabama. This is put up or shut up week for them, which, again, did not think I'd be saying this week against a Florida team that, by all means, is not great. They're not good sometimes. Sometimes they're good for maybe a drive or two, but most of the time, just average. Florida, if they can somehow get this done, would be super impressive for Billy Napier. We start to have that conversation about how he can wiggle his way into maybe one more year. But Tennessee, you've got to take advantage of your situation. I think Tennessee comes out, plays with a massive, just head-on-fire type of game. We've got to score points. We've got to get on the board immediately. And I think Florida, they cover that spread against, or Tennessee covers that spread against Florida.
Yeah, it's got to be a get-right week for Tennessee. I mean, this is one that you can't afford to mess around in, because Florida is truly playing for, all the marbles, right? They need something. They need a spark. So if for Tennessee, no doubt, you got to come out, be prepared to handle the situation, because you need the rebound. You absolutely need it. And everything you said about the Alabama, kind of similarity there applies here. I think Tennessee's got the talent to do it. They should. They should, just on paper.
I agree. This is one where, same situation, you don't want to get caught looking ahead. If you lose 2 weeks in a row, everything starts to implode. All the expectations for the year that you've built up go right down the drain. I think Tennessee will be fine in this one. It's just, do not put yourself in a position where Florida can make squirrely plays. Every Tennessee fan knows about that. You do not want to see that happen, because if a weird thing can happen in this game, it most definitely will. back to the other upset watch game we mentioned a little bit earlier, Iowa State at West Virginia. Tyler, you kind of already showed your hand on this one with Iowa State, just a calm, collected team. They've been taking care of business. The rowdy environment of Morgantown, it may not get to them a whole lot. West Virginia, though, they're coming off a massive win, really in terms of just how they did it. A 24-point win over Oklahoma State. Held OSU to only 17 minutes and 24 seconds of time of possession. That's the lowest in Oklahoma State's history as a program. They've never had a game that bad. West Virginia was able to dominate time that badly. It's because West Virginia could run for 300 yards and a little bit more. C.J. Donaldson, he's fun to watch. I just think West Virginia is a little bit inconsistent no matter where they really seem to play, at home or on the road. West Virginia could come out firing in this one, but if they can't play a full 4 quarters, like I don't think they can, Iowa State will find a way to get it done. This seems to be Iowa State's year for now, Tyler. It's either Iowa State or BYU, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. I didn't think I'd be saying that at the beginning of the year. I mean, Iowa State's one of those teams that you can't let them sneak up on you, and it's weird to think that they're 5-0 and they still might find a way to sneak up on someone.
Yeah, and that's just been the year so far for them, quietly under the radar. All of a sudden, you're the highest-ranked team in the Big 12, at least in the polls for now. So I think this is another game where they just kind of meander their way to win. It wouldn't surprise me at all if West Virginia does challenge them, but at the end of the day, I think Iowa State's just got a little bit more consistency. That's what's working for BYU too. That's why both of those teams are undefeated right now, is because they're getting it done in all 3 phases. Is it all 3 at the same time? No, but they're getting enough of it in each phase to be able to pull out those wins.
Absolutely. I think Iowa State, you mentioned it earlier, when you've got 3 different running backs that can absolutely just dominate you, it's a nightmare to try to deal with. We didn't really see a whole lot of it from West Virginia last week and having to contain Ollie Gordon. Oklahoma State's O-line kind of does that for them. West Virginia just gets to pile on there. Now you're playing against a completely different running attack that can beat you in so many different ways. And if you find a way to stop that, Rocco Beck can beat you over the top. He's not a fun quarterback to go up against. I think Iowa State takes care of business in Morgantown. It's on upset watch, but I don't think the upset is happening here. And speaking of BYU, brought them up moments ago. They are a 4-point favorite at home, taking on an inconsistent Arizona team, I think is really the best way to put it. Arizona, for so much talk about their offense going into the year, the defense has been the saving grace of this Wildcat team. And that has been an adventure, I'm sure, for Arizona fans. It's been a nightmare some weeks for Arizona fans. But now you got to take on a BYU team that, it's a middle of the afternoon on Fox. BYU really kind of has that ability to escape some games. SMU, they played ugly. Defense did their job. They were able to win the game. Baylor, you go on the road to Waco, get up 21-0 early. Let Baylor come back into the game. Bears make some big plays. BYU slams the door. Both of these teams have the ability to get into some funky one-possession games. BYU's been on the winning side of all of them. Can Arizona find a way to bounce back?
The funny part of this is I think if you were just to take away the names, Arizona and West Virginia have way too many similarities, I think, for either fan base's liking right now in terms of the inconsistencies. And with BYU, it's just a deal where when you win those one-possession games enough, we've seen teams go on runs in a singular season where they might win 5 or 6 one-possession games. Not often, but it happens. That's just a sign of a team that's composed in those situations. It's not afraid to make those plays. And that goes a long way sometimes. Miami's kind of off to that start, right? They pull it out of the fire a little bit. BYU hadn't necessarily put themselves in those type of holes, but still, lesson all the same. If you're a team that can pull it out in the clutch, you're going to have that experience whenever it pops up in the season to be able to continually do it. And that's just how you live sometimes. Now, against really good competition, when you get to, maybe a conference championship or a postseason game, I don't know if you could rely on that, but for these regular season games that sometimes turn into back and forth affairs out of nowhere, it's bodes well for BYU, I think, in the long run.
And I think so. And I think you're spot on about kind of the one possession deal. Because this BYU team, at least to me, not going to say it yet, but they're starting to remind me of kind of that 2019 Baylor, 2022 TCU, a little bit less, mainly more that 2019 Baylor that, if you remember, just kept finding ways to win. It wasn't pretty. Sometimes it was extremely ugly, but it doesn't matter if you win by 1 or win by 100. A win is a win is a win. And if BYU can continue that philosophy, this is going to be a lower scoring game. You know, some people might look at it and go, well, you know, Noah Fafita is a good quarterback. Jake Retzlaff's been impressing this year. Maybe we'll see some offense here. No, this is going to be a lower scoring game. Both of these defenses have stepped up in the clutch this year. I think it being in Provo, I'm going to side with BYU here. I think they're the more consistent team anyway. Like you mentioned, Arizona, West Virginia, kind of that same pit where any given week they might play like the best team in the Big 12. I just don't think it's happening this week. I like BYU to hold on and get the job done at home. But Tyler, we've got one more Big 12 game to talk about. And then I promise we're not talking about the Big 12 for the rest of the video game-wise, unless we just want to bring them up for fun.
Fascinating conference. It's a fascinating conference.
It really is. And we got to talk about, you know, the Mr. Headlines himself, talking about Deion Sanders, Colorado. We're finally talking about Colorado in a video, and that's because they are hosting Kansas State, who is number 18 in the country. K-State's a 4.5-point favorite. It's 9:15 Central Time. So Kansas State fans, buckle up. It's going to be a late night in Boulder, but you're used to this. This was a Big 8 game. This was a conference game for a long time. You're used to deals like this. But this is one of those weird games that Kansas State, the last time they went west, it didn't go well. They got blown out at BYU. Colorado has the playmakers. They have Travis Hunter, one of the best players, one of the best guys in general in the sport, someone who could really do anything you need him to do. Shedeur Sanders, he's been playing well. Can Colorado put themselves back on the national map even more so with an upset win over Kansas State?
Yeah, and I got to give Colorado credit. We, preseason weren't really liking their prospects. We thought the schedule may be a bit too tough. Obviously, all of a sudden it's gotten a little bit easier. Kansas isn't what we thought they would be. Oklahoma State definitely isn't what we thought they would be. So really, this Kansas State game and then a Utah game on Colorado schedules are the two where you say, okay, maybe they're the underdogs there. I think they've earned the right to be probably the favorites in the rest of those at this point. And since that Nebraska loss, it's been a team that has started to execute a lot cleaner. You had a hairy game against Baylor, obviously, but you found a way to win it, and that's all that matters. And you really took care of UCF. So can you continue that momentum? I definitely think Kansas State better be on the A game because Coach Prime is rolling right now. He's got them executing. He's got Travis in the Heisman conversation. Travis Hunter, I think for a lot of people, it's just a marvel what he could do both ways at this level. And then Shedeur Sanders is living up to, hey, this is going to be a year for the draft class where it's kind of open. Who's going to emerge as really the QB1. And Shedeur, for the most part, is doing what he can to try to claim that. So, and the rest of the crew is really chipping in for him. So, if you're Colorado, huge opportunity. This is the chance to really prove, okay, we are actually here and we're not just all talk.
Absolutely. And I think for Colorado, this is their second major statement game of the year. The Nebraska one did not go well. You got manhandled by Nebraska, but they've improved. You can see the improvement from September 7th to now. Well, a whole month later when we're recording this to where Colorado is. You had a bye week to get ready for it. If Kansas State didn't lose at BYU the way they did, I would pick Colorado to win this game. I think this would be the K-State upset springs on them finally. But I think Kansas State, and this is credit to Coach Kleiman and what Kansas State's able to do, when they get into a big loss like that, you're going to see them lock in. You're going to see Kansas State do everything they can. DJ Giddens, I think he's going to have another big day. Colorado, the one thing that kind of concerns me is can they stop that running attack? Because if you could stop the run game with K-State, you can stop K-State. That's how it feels like it's always been that way for Kansas State, no matter, as long as I've been alive at least. Avery Johnson, he can beat you with his arm. has that ability, but I think this is going to be one of those weird games back and forth. A lot of people are going to tune in to see how does Colorado look. This is their chance to really show themselves as a Big 12 contender. I just think they're going to fall short. I think K-State is just that good of a team. If it was earlier in the year, maybe Colorado gets them, but I think this is a recommitted, refocused Kansas State team that comes in and they prove a point that they are still one of the best teams in the Big 12.
Yeah, and I think that point you make about, the BYU game with Kansas State is definitely a big one because that refocuses you when you go just get embarrassed on the road like that to a team. Everybody thought, oh, they'll handle them, they'll be fine. And they're definitely not going to take Colorado lightly. And if you don't see a focused Kansas State team here, I'd be very surprised. I think it's going to be a really good game. I agree with you. I think Kansas State just kind of pulls it out in the end.
Yeah, and it should be a fun game. Like, this honestly will be a lot of excitement. I really do. This could be one of those back and forth, down to the wire type of deals that you love to see. It's going to be a fantastic ball game, I think. But at the end of the day, I'm not ready to crown Colorado back just yet. I'd like to see them jump one of the major hurdles successfully before we get there. But they're acing all the stuff they need to right now, with the exception of that Nebraska game. But I think Nebraska's coming along a lot better than other people thought they would. It's just, I'm not ready to crown Colorado back yet, unless they surprise me. If they win this game, they get all praise for me, and I'll finally stop being critical of Colorado. But they're just not there yet, I don't think. But we've got one final game to talk about, Tyler. And it's one that I think is going to go under the radar for most people. It's a Saturday night on the SEC network. A lot of people aren't going to be thinking about this game because of all the craziness that's going to be going on with Ohio State, Oregon, and LSU Ole Miss. That's Vanderbilt at Kentucky. This is going to be a weird game, I feel like. This just has odd written all over it. Kentucky, 14-point favorite. Coming off a bye week. Before that, the upset of Ole Miss. Vanderbilt, do I need to explain what they did? You can read it on the screen. They beat Alabama. We already talked about this earlier in the video. You know what Vanderbilt did. If you're watching this video, you know what Vanderbilt did. And so now it's a battle of 2 3-2 teams. Someone's going to be 4-2 at the end of this deal. Who is the team with more momentum at the end of the day? Is it Vanderbilt riding high with that big win they had? Or is it Kentucky, who had a week to recover, had a week to see what Vanderbilt did, and now has the ability to scheme for it to make sure they're not the next team that gets put on the list of losing to Vanderbilt?
Yeah, and Cade, I feel unfortunately for Vandy, this might be a case of that big one hangover. We kind of saw, to draw an interesting comparison, Northern Illinois go through, right? You knock off Notre Dame, and then they kind of fell apart a little bit after that. And that's not bad coaching or anything like that, but it's hard to you pull off such a huge win, and it's sometimes hard to refocus, right? You think you're the toast of the town for at least a week, and then rally hits, and you got to go play another football game and execute that. So, as much as I love Diego Pavia and his story and this Vanderbilt team, what Clark Lee's doing, this does feel like an easy letdown spot for a program that's not used to handling this type of pub. Plus when you march the goalpost 3 miles down Broadway there in Nashville, there's some partying going on. So I do worry about that for Vandy and Kentucky. Just say what you will. I don't know what to make of Mark Stoops and this team this year. They've been wildly average at times, but defensively they've been there. And, offensively it's just what Brock Vandagriff are you getting? That's what it comes down to. It seems like sometimes I feel like he's primed for a solid game in this one. And, a little more surgical maybe in terms of his approach compared to Milroe. Jalen Milroe, if you could get him trying to scramble around a little bit, you get him to hesitate, lean away from his pocket passing ability, which he has. He's not just a scrambler. Then you could maybe slow him up a little bit where Vandagriff might be a little bit more locked in to take what's there quick, right? If it's a drag route, if it's a slant, he'll take it, he'll go with it. And I think that will be the difference. It'll kind of throw Vandy off a little bit. I like Kentucky to upset the upsetters, if you will.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at with this one. This is one that I think think a lot of people want Vandy to win. They're kind of America's team
Well,
at this
of course.
point. You come off a big win like that, everyone's going to be rooting for them. I just don't think this is a matchup that suits them. Kentucky is a very physical defense that preys on stopping the run and just shutting you down in levels. If they can beat you with the D-line, they'll get you with the linebackers, and the secondary will do its part. Vanderbilt, they kind of like to do that same wave of attack. They want to get you up front, spread you out, and go from there. And I think Kentucky, if they can play their type of game of clock control, they can beat Vandy's type of game of clock control. These are two teams that I feel like really bounce well off other teams in the SEC, but against each other, this might turn into a rock fight, and I like Kentucky's defense a lot more than I like Vanderbilt's. But that will do it for this episode. I mean, folks, it is crazy to think of. You look at the schedule. I know I said it earlier. It's week 7 of college football. We are nearing, if we're not already at the halfway point for your team, we are dangerously close to it. Some teams are going to be over that halfway mark at the end of this week. It is going to be a fun, wild ride for the rest of the season. So, folks, as always, like I said at the beginning of the video, feel free to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below what you agree with this on, disagree with this on. Give us your takes on what you think is going to happen this week. And then, as always, hit the notification bell as well to be notified when new videos come out. And, folks, until next time, have a good one, everybody.